concern. So Daryl has been working on a number of these issues from the governance program and really looking at how technology, especially evolving technologies, are shaping the world that we live in, and then what policies and regulations are needed. And then Troy has been working as part of Booz Allen, really helping and collaborating with government agencies, federal, state, and local, to address these issues of emerging technologies and how to properly deploy and embrace these technologies in a more proactive manner. So they have hands-on, they have boots on the ground, as our fellow firemen would say, that we heard from yesterday. But you both are boots on the ground and looking at the issues from a different perspective. So thank you for joining us today. So Troy, first question to you. Now, as you're seeing the agencies at the federal and even at the state and local level start to look at the technology of drone technology, as we know there are a number of issues that they have to work through. What is your perspective on how are the agencies embracing deployment of the technology and looking at the technology and what's their thinking and how are you helping them get through these issues?
Yeah, it's fun, and specifically with data security, when you start to think of that, I think that's one of their biggest challenges. And it's shifting from agency to agency, from civil to defense. I think you start to see the varying degrees of complexity that they're dealing with. But predictability, I think, is key in what they're really trying to do. And because predictability reduces risk, reduces cost, reduces delays, and all the things that they do. Predictability also allows, I think, drone service providers and manufacturers like you to take risk and invest in technology, and allows you to build out new platforms, new configurations, new sensors, new software, and without that predictability, it's very difficult, right? And without that predictability, what happens is the product just becomes stagnant, suboptimized, and the quality and the performance shows up in the work that we do. And the work that we do shows up in the missions of our clients and the things that we're trying to do. So predictability is very important. And understanding predictability really comes down to understanding those variances across civil agencies and defense agencies and state and local. And even within defense, you see multiple variations of requirements, whether you're on base or off base. And I think the real challenge there is maintaining those security protocols as a consultant and working with these drone providers. We work with Precision Hawk. Trying to maintain that variation is key, whether it's the platform that you have to use, or whether it's the air-gapped computer that you have to have, or the disconnected video link on your controller. Can you imagine flying like that? That's always really fun, and those are the things that they have to deal with. So it's a lengthy process usually. I mean, we have to get waivers from the Office of Secretary of Defense if we want to fly on an installation. Before that, even before we do anything, we have to have a cyber assessment on the platforms and the things that we're doing. So it's not predictable at times because things are changing constantly, and it's a lengthy process. So there's some difficulties there. So those are the things that we're working very closely with our clients.
But you're still seeing demand.
Oh, yes.
Great expectations of what this emerging technology can do.
Even with the changes. Last year we were right in the middle of a project, and all of these requirements hit. Everybody bunkered down, that including our clients, and worked very closely to make sure that the project was a success. So that's amazing to see how people can do that. But I've also seen the demand signal in use for drones. It's gone up almost 600%.
That's 600% significant. Daryl, knowing that we're talking about emerging technology, and knowing the work that you've done over the last years in terms of helping a number of industries and helping them think through how to address these security data management issues, are there lessons to be learned by the drone industry community based upon the work and what you've seen other industries do in terms of how they embrace and address these technology data security issues?
I think looking at other technologies is instructive, just in terms of seeing how they have managed some of these privacy and security issues, because every new technology faces a number of challenges, and people have worries about how they actually are going to operate. And so, for example, you look at the various generations of mobile technology. Oftentimes there were companies that had different technical specifications, and it was hard for the industry as a whole to develop. And so what industries did in those situations was to come together and use technical standard setting to basically address people's concerns and create some of the predictability that Troy has been talking about. And there are a couple of organizations that have done great work in this area. The IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1884 when electricity was coming on the scene, and there were lots of questions about that as a new technology. And so the experts got together and kind of figured out voltage issues and the technical specs on various types of electrical equipment. And then at the government level, there's an organization called NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which basically does a lot of critical infrastructure things. So they work on the power grid, on robotics, on nanotechnology, and so on. But they try and come up with agreed upon technical standards that address various concerns. So I think that is a good model for other new technologies that are coming on the scene today.
Excellent. So at DJI, as all of you know in the audience, we're practical. We always like to understand what's the path forward and how do we engineer ourselves into a situation that we're addressing and sort of working through these issues. So Troy, from your perspective, what's the path forward for the industry collectively to work with the agencies, public safety, to address their concerns? And how do we instill greater confidence and at the same time address the issues that they're concerned with from a network perspective?
It's fun, and it's a lot of hard work, and I think what's really interesting is I've really seen a lot of our clients dig in, and that's exciting to see. So I think the most difficult thing that we need to do is we need to work with our clients and industry, all of us, right? Work together very closely with the regulators, and we're designing out what we're going to do for our specific industry. I don't think it's fair to say that it can be across all industries. That's going to be very difficult, but we need to start thinking about the data architecture that we're putting together, the data collection protocols, which is what we're all here to do, the drones and everything that we're doing. And now a lot of the AI applications and the analysis and reporting that you're doing, the decision making, all of that needs to come together and needs to be pulled together in one area. And the key there is really, build right now for what you currently understand are the standards, but make sure that you're designing and planning for flexibility and scale. And I think scale is something people forget about. A lot of our clients start with one drone, they end up with 400, right? And so nobody's thinking about that scale when you talk about the data, the information, the fleet, all the things that they're doing. So we'd like to start with cyber first. I think that's important. It is so difficult to put cyber in at the end of anything that you're doing. So cyber first, always, and building a data architecture that has that ability to scale, that has that ability to ingest huge amounts of data and at a very high velocity, because that's what we're going to need in the future. And then making sure that you have a drone service provider that has that flexibility and that ability to scale, and has those right platforms to do the things that you have to do. And then it's always really difficult, but you have to keep safety always in mind, but you're really kind of balancing that with cost considerations. And so the way that I would kind of look at it is you start with the standards, measure against those, and then make those adjustments and relax as you learn.
That sounds very good guidance. So things that we need to do as a collective.
From experience.
From experience, sure. Daryl, from your perspective, from a governance model perspective, what's the path forward? We've just heard from Troy from a practical perspective of how the agencies or critical infrastructure entities are looking at these issues from a governance model. Sort of stepping back, what is your guidance and what do you see should be some of the steps that we should be taking collectively as an industry?
Well, we know that the public is concerned about privacy, security, and the impact of new technologies on human safety. So those are things that everyone has to address. And the key thing is really getting the governance piece right, thinking about what are the appropriate policies and regulations that will reassure the public, that will give us the benefits we want, while also mitigating possible risks. And we're seeing a lot of interest at the local, state, and federal levels in these new technologies. And so at the local level, police and fire are engaging with UAS. At the state level, there are a number of state departments of transportation that are active in this area. At the federal level, the Department of Interior has been a big innovator, and then the FAA is is charged with kind of regulating things that go into the sky. So figuring out what are the right policies from each of those levels. We see lots of examples. California just passed a new privacy law that gives people more control over their personal information. There's a question in terms of how long data should be retained. That's a policy issue that can be addressed, so that's a way to deal with that particular concern. On government procurement, kind of coming up with consistent standards so that we make sure whatever technologies the federal government is purchasing are safe and reliable. And so I think those are all areas where there's a path forward, but it basically involves industry engaging with the relevant government regulators.
So I think we just heard it again. It's industry engaging with amongst ourselves, collaborating with our government and policymakers and regulators to really arrive, and key stakeholders, to arrive at a solution that's really the path forward for us collectively. So I think we've heard the message again, as we heard yesterday. You've all reinforced it, so thank you for both of you for coming and sharing your perspective and thoughts. But look, what remains, a lot of work needs to be done over the next few months, next few quarters on a go-forward basis. But the issue here is to collaborate and work across the work that you all are doing in addressing these issues head on. So with that, Daryl and Troy, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to continuing working with you. Thank you, Daryl.